Our Bible word is Matthew 5, verse 16. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So here we have Jesus, and particularly in the Gospel of Matthew, this is the new Moses speaking to the new covenant people. Jesus is the new Moses. And this Moses typology, it also comes through in other books of the New Testament, but it's most prominent in the Gospel of Matthew. And there are various elements in the Gospel, how we can recognize that for the evangelist who authored this book, or maybe it was a group of scribes and sages at this time who authored it for a Jewish community, Jewish Christians. It's for them, it's how they write the gospel to also explain this is the new Moses, Jesus. He's the Messiah, he's the Son of God, etc. But particularly what's emphasized here is he's the new Moses. And there are various ways that the evangelist or the authors does this. If we go, for example, there's this fivefold structure that we find, those big discourses of Matthew's gospel. And I mean, our Bible word comes from the first big discourse. I mean, that's from chapters 5 to 7. And each of those 5 discourses, if you go there in chapter 7, verse 28, chapter 11, verse 1, 13, etc., in those verses, you can read something to the effect that when Jesus finished these sayings, in other words, that was the way the author or authors said, no, this was now Moses, his teaching has come to an end now, or the new Moses. And there's 5 of them. And 5 of these discourses, they imitate the 5 books of Moses. The second way is the explicit contrast between Jesus' teaching and that was given by Moses. Because on 6 occasions, especially in chapter 5, if you go look at those verses, on 6 occasions you read there that Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, but I say to you. So yeah, it's Jesus says, you've heard that it was said, and there's various things that he mentions, but then he says, but I say to you. So that's now the new Moses speaking. If you're going to compare Jesus, Moses was a high-level lawgiver because he was probably the major prophet for the Jews. He was the mediator of the law. He was a very important figure for the Jewish people. But here now is someone more important. And Jesus says, but I say to you. So my word carries greater authority than Moses. Because sometimes the teaching of Jesus contradicts that of Moses. On divorce, for example, Jesus said, you can't just divorce except for immorality or fornication. Otherwise, there were other reasons Moses said you can just divorce. No, also Jesus says, don't swear. But Moses said you can make oaths by swearing. Jesus says, no, don't make any oaths, etc. But Jesus also says, I've come to fulfill the law. So in other words, the true purpose of the law. This is the way you must understand it. So the scribes and the Pharisees, you can say that they were like low-level judges, regional judges. Their authority was Moses. But if you want to use a modern analogy, Jesus, he's the constitutional court. He makes the final rulings. This is how the law must be interpreted and applied. He's the final authority on the law. Another way that this idea of Jesus being the new Moses comes across is that if you go to there, chapter 17, verse 5, there at the transfiguration of Jesus, where God says, this is my son, hear him. This refers back to the words we find in Deuteronomy 18, verses 15 to 18. Because there God tells Moses, I will raise up a prophet from among your brethren like you, that they must listen to him. So yes, that connection also with Moses. Of course, that account of the transfiguration we also find in the other Gospels, where we also say, hear him. So it refers back to Deuteronomy of this new prophet like Moses will come along. So there's a bit of that in the other Gospels. But yeah, particularly with the other things, It's very prominent in the Gospel of Matthew. Also, if you go to the beginning of the Gospel, where Herod wants to kill Jesus, Joseph then is instructed, go to Egypt, stay there. And that's the account that we find there in 2 verses 13 to 23. That's the flight and the return from Egypt. Already there, the evangelist associates Jesus with the Exodus, the new Exodus, also with Moses coming out of Egypt. So already there he lays the foundation for this Moses typology that comes through. We can also go to chapter 23, because there Jesus goes at the scribes and the Pharisees and how they interpret the law. Jesus gave the church, Peter and the apostles, the disciples, authority how to interpret the law. If we go specifically to chapter 16 verse 19 and 18 verse 18, there Jesus gives Peter and the disciples the authority to bind and to loose. That specifically refers to how to interpret and to apply the law. There's also the way Jesus approaches the law. His approach. It's, if we look through Matthew, for example, if we go to chapter 7, verse 12, it's about the golden rule. That's what the law refers to also. The way you want other people to treat you, that's the way you must treat them. It's also based in love. Love God. Love your neighbor. It's also based in things like mercy and justice and faith. If you look at those repeated references in chapters 9, 12, and 23. That's how Jesus also approaches the law. It's not about binding people with heavy burdens. It's about relationships, quality of relationships between people and God and amongst people themselves. That it's rooted in love, in a genuine love. So this is Jesus, the new Moses. Chapter 5 to 7. He's now inaugurating the teaching of the new covenant. He's seated on a mountain. That's how teachers typically taught, by being seated. So he begins. And of course, he begins by giving the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who mourn, etc. And also he speaks blessing on those who are persecuted. If we go to verse 10, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. But also Jesus extends this to those who are persecuted because they are followers of Jesus. Blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So if you are persecuted for being a follower of Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, the new Moses, you are blessed. And now, our immediate textual unit is where the followers of Jesus, in other words, people of the new covenant, the followers of the new Moses, they are called to be salt and light. Of course, the image of salt is that it's a preservative. Salt is also valuable. So in other words, Jesus is saying his followers are valuable. They bring also value to the world. They also bring flavor to the world. In other words, they bring a positive difference. They are valuable and they bring a positive difference to the world because they must influence their world. That's why Jesus also refers to them as salt. Same with the image of light. If we go to verse 14, you are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. And what's also relevant to our Bible word is what Jesus says in verse 15. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Here Jesus is referring to a typical first century house. It mainly consisted of one room. There was main entrance, so there was not so much light, etc. But there's a typical one room place. And he says, in that one room house, you put those little oil lamps that they built back then. You put it on a place so it gives light for everybody. That is what the followers of Jesus, the new Moses, must be like. And then we come to our Bible word. Let your light so shine before men, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So Jesus is telling our people, be salt, be light. In other words, you influence the world in a way. You add value. You bring truth. You bring authenticity. And that's the main thing. Be authentic. This is not doing something to pretend or to be seen by other people. Because later on, if we go to chapter 6, from verses 1 to 18, there Jesus gives teaching on almsgiving, also on prayer, also on fasting. And he tells them, don't give alms like the hypocrites, and don't pray like the hypocrites, and don't fast like the hypocrites. Specifically, if we go to almsgiving, he says they take heed that you do not do your charitable deeds before men to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father in heaven. Therefore, when you do your charitable deed, do not sound a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets. But he also says in verse 3, but when you do a charitable deed, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So there it's about doing things to be seen, right? You're a pretender, a hypocrite. You do it with false motivations. Compared to our immediate Bible word where Jesus says, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. That's a different motivation. It's being authentic. It's not about drawing attention to yourself. It's just living without what you are within. It's about authenticity, genuine love, genuine concern, genuine love for God and your neighbor. That is what our immediate saying of Jesus is about. That people may see it, that you are authentic, that you do this out of love. Don't be a pretender. Don't be a hypocrite to draw attention to yourself. The kingdom of God, the teaching of Jesus, the new Moses, the teaching of the new covenant, this new law that he brings. It's about this renewal of the heart, change of the heart. It's about the genuine love for God, the way that Jesus interprets and applies the law. Love for God, love your neighbor, justice, mercy, faith. Don't be pretentious. Don't be a hypocrite. We must become genuine within, based on a real relationship with God, based on love and trust, love for our neighbor. That's the type of light that must shine without us, that others people can see.